Hey guys, how's everybody doing today? I'm Connie Fuchsa with Foot Title Group, where we protect your home ownership. Welcome to Coffee with Connie. Thanks so much for taking your time to tune in today. So, on the heels of our conversation the other day, I really wanted to talk for a little while about what we talked about the other day, and I wanted to follow up a little bit because I had so many people reach out to me about different things with regard to mom adding me to her property. And so I wanted to go into that a little deeper and talk about a little bit more information. But the first thing I want to tell you is part of the purpose of me getting on here and talking to you guys about all kinds of things with respect to real estate is that I first have to qualify and say to you, I don't know everything about real estate, but I have been doing this for a long time. And so I've seen different things and had different experiences that I like to try to share. So it might spur a question for you to ask the professional that handles that particular aspect. So let's talk about this for a minute, because let's start back where we were on Tuesday, where we talked about mom is getting a little bit up in age. She wants to make sure that her property goes where she wants it to go if something happens to her. And so we want to talk about how we can do that. And so the first thing we talk about is, mom has a will. She has designated in her will where she wants all of her items to go if something was to happen to her. But the thing about the real estate is that if you put it in the will and it's addressed through the will, then whoever is taking ownership of that property may have to pay some estate taxes. Now, again, I am not a tax attorney. I'm not an accountant. So I don't want to sit here and talk to you specifically about what those taxes may look like and what taxes could happen with regard to estates or with regards to capital gains if you take over the ownership of a piece of property. But what I will tell you is that if your mom knows for sure she wants you to own the property, then it may be an option for her to do a deed transferring the ownership not directly to you, maybe, because she may want to make a change and maybe do some other things. She may want the security of knowing she still owns the property, but maybe she wants to add you to the ownership. Or maybe she does want to just transfer the whole property over to you right now, even though she's going to live there. You have that type of arrangement, and she's fine with that. So what happens in that instance is we would take the information on the way that she owns the property now and prepare a deed transferring the property from just her, if it's into both of you, into both of your names, into her name and your name. And the way that it would matter to make sure that you took ownership of that property if something was to happen to her is that it is in the tenancy, or the tenancy is the way that the ownership happens. So there's two different ways that more than one person can own a piece of property. Well, there's actually three, depending on if they're a married couple or not. But let's talk about, for this example, if you have a mom and a daughter, or a mom and a son, or a dad and a daughter and or a dad and a son, then there's two options. There's tenants there's tenants in common, or there's joint tenants with the right of survivorship. So tenants in common means that each of you own a percentage divided interest. So whatever that happens to be, maybe it's 50-50, maybe it's 2/3, 1/3, however your parent, as they decide to make this change, makes that decision, that's how that ownership can be. And what that means is if something happens to either one of you, that person's interest goes into their estate, and so the surviving person would share it with the other person's estate. So if your parent wanted it to all go directly to you and no one else to have an ownership interest, then that way would more than likely be joint tenants with the right of survivorship. Each person owns 100% of that property, and if something was to happen to one person, it automatically is the other person's complete property. And the reason for doing this and talking about the estate process is then the property does not go through the estate process, because the person, your parent, wanted to have that property already owns it. So they already took ownership long before anything happened to them. So a couple of the questions that I had were with regards to taxes, whether the tax ramifications are doing something like this. What happens capital gains wise if you transfer a piece of property from one person to another that's a family member? What's the capital gain situation? Again, I don't do income taxes, and I don't have anything to do with taxes, estate taxes. But what I will tell you is, if you want to make sure that you don't have to pay estate taxes on that property, then you want to go ahead and add someone to that ownership. Now, it may not be a clear-cut situation where maybe you have several children and you want to add one or two of them, and then you want to make sure that they both own it together. You need to understand the dynamics of your family and certainly make that decision best for you. And in that case, if there's some problems between those owners or those siblings, then you may want to think about what the estate process looks like, because then a lot of forms have to be filed. Your property is protected from, a disagreement or a problem. So you may want to look at it the estate process way. The difference is that you will have the surviving people will be paying estate taxes on the value of that property that's in the estate, which would include the property. With adding someone to the ownership, it doesn't go into the estate because specifically that person or those people already own it. Because you deeded it to them, they have an ownership interest, so they don't have to pay estate taxes because they already own it. So talking a little bit about those taxes, that's the part that I do understand and I do know. But with regards to one of the questions that I had specifically about capital gains tax, and in Maryland specifically, we're talking about withholding tax as well. If one of the people who own it don't live in the state, then the state of Maryland may charge them a withholding tax unless they're exempt, and you'd have to go through that process. But so that capital gains tax would not come up until that property was sold. It wouldn't come up when it's transferred from the parent to the children. Now, as long as it's an immediate family member transfer, then you wouldn't have to pay recording taxes to the county, and you wouldn't have that capital gains tax. The capital gains tax is when you sell it to a third party that is not a family member and it's not for value. So, but as far as how those capital gains taxes are calculated and exactly when that's triggered, that's going to be best answered by a tax advisor, because that's certainly not me. That is a specialty area, just like real estate and title is, that has so many nuances that I rely on the tax people to answer those questions. So if you have those kind of questions, reach out to your tax advisor. If you don't have one, let me know. We have certainly have several that we like to work with. So let's talk a teeny bit more about this transfer in the ownership from mom's property, in mom's property to someone else. Let's say, for example, mom transfers the property or adds her new boyfriend to the property. What happens if something happens to mom and you're not on the property but the new boyfriend is? Or what happens if you own a piece of property and you want to add your girlfriend and you're putting a mortgage on that property, and you're taking mom and dad off because they helped you co-sign originally, but you need to take them off. Excuse me, sorry about that. So remember that when you're talking about adding or removing someone from the ownership of a property, or the title is actually the ownership chain of the property, and we're talking about specifically a deed. When you add or remove someone from the deed of the property, that transfers the ownership. So whether it's signed and not recorded, which happens sometimes, that's still ownership. That ownership is still transferred, and it's still a valid transfer. If you, let's say mom added her boyfriend, let's talk about that decision, or dad added his girlfriend, and something happened to mom. So I'm pausing here, as you may notice, because those family members that may have an ownership interest in the estate would only have an ownership interest as to the percentage that was left by mom. So if mom added her boyfriend to the ownership of the property and they took ownership as joint tenants with the right of survivorship, remember I explained that each person owns 100% of that property. Mom's ownership interest no longer exists. It all immediately went to the boyfriend, or in dad's situation, to the girlfriend. Excuse me. Rain came through and that washed a lot of the pollen out, but I think it's all back again. It's just a little bit, making everything a little fuzzy. So mom signed the property over to the boyfriend, or excuse me, added the boyfriend. Dad added the girlfriend, and mom passed away. If mom did a deed with the boyfriend for joint tenants with the right of survivorship, it doesn't matter what the estate documents or her will said about that property, because if they did it with joint tenants with the right of survivorship, the boyfriend owns 100% of that property. It does not go through the estate process. likewise is true for the dad with the girlfriend or any scenario. Now, if mom added the boyfriend and they did tenants in common, where each of them owned 50% of the property, or mom owned 2/3, boyfriend owned 1/3, then yes, whoever has an interest in her estate on her passing would have an interest in her percentage of the ownership. So 1/3, 2/3, half, whatever that happens to be. But only if she purchased or transferred that property and they their ownership was set up as tenants in common. So definitely something to think about, whether it's mom and boyfriend, whether you own a townhouse and you want to add your girlfriend and something happens to you, you want to make sure your children get ownership. You know, there's lots of different nuances to this that you need to think about and you need to understand when you're talking about transferring the ownership. Because if you're doing it for estate planning purposes, you need to make sure that you understand who's going on the ownership and how are they going to own that property and how will it affect that estate. So certainly lots of things we can talk about and help you understand or navigate through as you're talking about doing deeds to transfer the ownership. Let's talk about one other thing, and we talk about this all the time, but I so find this happens so many times. You have a husband and wife who, when they originally got married, maybe one of the spouses, maybe the husband, had purchased a townhouse, owned that, lived in that forever, and once they got married, they decided to rent out the townhouse and they purchased a piece of property together. So now you still have that townhouse sitting out there, and they've been married for 5 years, 10 years, whatever, a year, and the husband is still the only owner on that townhouse. Now, when something happens to him, a will or not a will, the wife has, you know, a potential ownership interest, but that's going to have to go through an estate process. And does he have adult children that maybe the wife doesn't get along with? Or maybe she does, but their intent is not to share that ownership with those adult children. His intent was always for his wife to have that interest. You need to get that deed done. It doesn't automatically happen. And you've got some estate tax issues to think about. You've got potentially ownership issues. When something happens and someone passes away, I think a lot of us can agree that people do kind of kooky things, and everybody's idea of what should happen totally changes. So it's something to think about when you're really talking about a lot of, not just estate planning, but what do you own? Where do you want it to go? Because any of us could walk out in the middle of the street and get hit by a car today. I was walking yesterday morning, and I almost got brushed by a car. It was really kind of a scary experience, and another story for another day. But the fact of the matter is, none of us have control over what's going to happen in the next 5 minutes that could actually, you know, I mean, could just happen to you and you're not prepared. So make sure that you're thinking about real estate. The only way to transfer real estate is through an estate process or through a court order or through a deed. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. Hey, Rhonda, how are you? Good morning, Nancy. Thank you so much. Nancy's a fellow title person who retired a couple years ago. Thank you so much for your feedback. I appreciate it. Good morning, Latana. Good morning, Pandora. Thank you guys so much for taking your time and tuning in. Hopefully I helped you think about a few things. You know, earlier in the week we talked about a mom who wanted to add a daughter to a property and what ramifications are that. But, you know, there's so many different thoughts about this and so many different pieces. You know, do you guys, maybe you purchased your property as a husband and wife originally, maybe you purchased your property before you were husband and wife originally, and because of your situation, you were boyfriend and girlfriend, maybe mom and dad helped out with some funding, and maybe you took ownership as tenants in common. Well, if you did that, and now you're married, that could cause a little bit of a problem too, because, excuse me, because when something happens to one of you, that property is still as tenants in common, even though you're married. So that means that anyone that has an ownership interest in your estate could own that property with you or with the surviving person. So these are all things that you need to think about, because that ownership of that property, it's your single most important, valuable asset, not important, but most valuable asset that you have. And you want to make sure that your wishes are taken care of. And if you're married, that you and your spouse have all of that taken care of, that your estate planning is set up. I mean, any of us, as I said, could walk off a curb and get hit by a car today. Something could fall out of the sky. Who knows? And, you know, it seems extreme, but it happens every single day. So hopefully that helped you guys with a little bit more information on deeds how it affects your ownership to property, adding people, removing people. And as always, please reach out and ask questions. I love the feedback. It really helps me gear things that I talk about towards things that may help you, number one. Number two, if you have questions personally, message me. I mean, I'm certainly happy to help you answer any of these questions, work through any of these pieces, maybe understand a little bit better something that's working and happening in your family. Excuse me. Maybe you have a personal situation that you just want to talk about. So we're here to answer any of those questions. Message me, email me, reach out to any of our team members in Maryland and Virginia. I think I've said this before, but at the beginning of the broadcast, I didn't say that this concept, these discussions almost always are things that are reflective throughout the country and aren't necessarily just on properties in Maryland and Virginia where we live and work. They may be things that are definitely valuable thoughts and considerations. There may be some different nuances in certain areas, but in this particular aspect, this is not. This is something that is true across the country, so no matter where your property is, these are concepts that definitely affect you as well, whether you're on the East Coast, the West Coast, wherever that happens to be in the United States. Lastly, let me follow up just real quick with a couple of things we have going on. As I said, every month we try to put out new content for you to help you with more information. It's the beginning of May. If you pop on our website, you'll see there's a button that's right down in the middle that says what's new. Click on that. Our feature for this month is 10 things first-time homebuyers need to know, and it gives you just some pointers, some things that, again, that may spur some questions. Go on, download it, get that information. If you missed some of our previous presentations or content, you can go on the buyers, sellers, or realtors page and click on resources. All of that content that we've previously done is up there for you. This weekend, if you are in the Southern Maryland or the Northern Neck area of Virginia, we are having a free event at the King George YMCA. Make Yourself at Home in King George, which will have vendors, and they're all nonprofits in that community. Nonprofits and service providers that want to talk to you about things that are going on in that community. So the police department is going to have a self-defense class. At the Y, you can bring your children to this event because the counselors there will be having a kid zone. We'll have free food, free water. The fire department will be there for the kids to be able to climb through the fire truck and them to talk to them about it. The Parks and Rec, the school system, social services, all kinds of nonprofits are going to be there to talk to you about the things that are available in the King George community. So come out, check it out. This Saturday, 10 to noon. We'd love to see you, and there's door prizes and all kinds of fun things going on. Let me mention two other things. Today, we are going to be launching something really exciting a little bit later, probably around 11. We're going to be going live again about something really cool that Foot Title Group is partnering with someone else to sponsor. So check in if you can, tune in, or follow us a little bit later and check that out and see how you can help us reach the goal. And finally, but certainly not the least, if you're a title company and you want to work with us to help you get to the next level, you want to learn some more about some marketing tips, some things that we're working on, you can follow us on bit.ly/small title company marketing. And that's on LinkedIn. It's a group that we've set up, and we want to get together and talk about things that are going on, how we can better our community, because ultimately my goal and my passion is to make sure that every single person that's over 21 of home buying age on the planet understands the value of a title company and why it's so important for you to make a choice about who handles your home closing and protects your home ownership. So join us over there if you're a small title company and you want to work together on helping us get that message out and being stronger community in the title community. Thanks to you guys so much for tuning in. I really appreciate your time and your feedback. Please keep it coming. I'm Connie Fuchsa with Foot Title Group, where we protect your home ownership. Have a great day, everybody, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.